Welcome to It's Not About the Money, a podcast in search of grounded fundraising. I'm Heather, and together with my co-host Andy, we look beyond the quick tips and formulas. Join us as we explore the nuance and complexity of ministry fundraising. If you want to thrive in partner development, not just survive it, this is the place for you.
Welcome back, everybody. So excited to recap this episode from Carolyn Kellum. And today, it's rare, but it's just Heather and I.
That's right. We tried to have a few different people join us, but you know what? They are busy doing what they do in ministry, and that's a beautiful thing.
And I feel like it's more important to get these out on a regular basis than kind of drag it out. So
totally.
More than happy to dive into this. Some really good nuggets.
Oh, man. So many good nuggets.
Yeah. Yeah, I can start us off.
Yeah.
Early on, she started reflecting on the idea that for some people, fundraising feels like a necessary evil. But on the other side of that, we realize, I guess, just how critical it is to our formation and how important it is for our preparation for the field. And I was just reflecting on that. It made me remember the sermon from last Sunday. It was really good. It was from the end of John. And one of the takeaways was that God uses our failures to mold us and to prepare us for something else. And so the example that he used was apparently a classic one. I was not familiar with it because I'm not a golf fanatic or fan, even a little bit. But apparently there is this immortalized shot that Tiger Woods took.
Okay.
And so I'm going to try to paint it like secondhand, what he was telling us. So apparently the ball had landed right between like middle tall grass and like really tall grass and kind of bumped up against that.
Okay.
And he had to shoot it up over a hill at an angle. Really, really, really challenging. Like an impossible shot. And so he lines up, like he talks to his caddy, he gets his club, he takes a couple practice swings through the thicker grass, steps up, chips it in there, and it hits the green and it starts banking at just the right moment. It slows as it approaches the hole and then finally just tips right in.
Wow.
And he goes crazy. The bystanders go crazy. Everybody's just ecstatic. And it goes down as like one of the best shots in golf history, apparently. Anyways, the point of that whole story was he wouldn't have been there if he hadn't have hit a terrible shot off the tee.
Interesting.
So this iconic moment in his life that he's never going to forget, most likely, is because he blew it at the beginning. So that's interesting to me as we kind of approach fundraising and just, it's okay to not be awesome at it right from the beginning. And God's going to use those bumbling efforts. He's going to use those mistakes. He's going to, your false starts and whatever it is. And at the end, the more progress you make, the more impressive it is and the more glory God gets.
Yeah.
So that's what stood out to me first. Yeah, what about you?
Yeah, I really think that that's an interesting correlation that you made with that part from the sermon. And also just to highlight, we talk about all the time that there's so much that happens in the initial fundraising season, certainly, and even in the ongoing reality of support-based work that prepares you for ministry. I don't want to belabor that too much because we do talk about it quite often, but it is just when you really step back and kind of take in the skills you develop, the dependence that it nurtures on the Lord, your own understanding of your sense of control or lack of control. Like when you really step back and look at all those things, it's so clear that it's not an obstacle that you have to overcome before ministry, at least not in the sense that it can or should be avoided, or it's not doing something to better equip you,
Our failures aren't a surprise to him.
Yeah.
He's the God of the universe. He's also the master of our failures and of repurposing those. Yeah.
I really thought that it was helpful. So in our conversation with Carolyn, she was speaking specifically to fundraising in the domestic context. So a lot of the conversation was around that.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that she said that she feels like one of the unique maybe considerations or obstacles in that can be that people are far more focused on overseas missions work, or maybe they're just kind of like they've been primed to give more readily to overseas work. I'm wondering how much of that just comes from these movements that really wanted to draw awareness to the 1040 window.
Which is a good thing.
Totally good thing. I mean, certainly we should be thinking about parts of the world that have no access to the Bible or the gospel, that there's no established church. And certainly that doesn't mean that we shouldn't care about what's happening down the street.
Right.
Yeah.
In our neighborhoods.
Totally.
Right? It's Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth.
Yeah. I'm curious when she said that, like, how did that hit you? We're like, oh, yeah, I think we are more primed to give overseas or...
Well, part of it just could be my personal history, but yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Okay.
That's just where my mind defaults to, I guess. Mm-hmm. But I definitely know people that work in student ministry or prison ministry, and you hear about it from the pulpit or whatever, helping out, and very important.
Yeah.
Very significant. So it's kind of, I don't know, in some ways a shame that it doesn't get more press, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder if part of it is just because people have kind of put caring for those kinds of needs into the box of the local church or the many parachurch entities that exist that maybe aren't necessarily full-time ministry, but are some other kind of nonprofit,
Very likely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is a good, I mean, again, those are good things, right? It's good that our churches are taking care of people that are disadvantaged. It's good that there's organizations out there, but the shadow side of that is maybe the individual is less engaged with those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance and complexity to all of it. But, I was actually, as I was reflecting on that comment and just thinking of my own thoughts on, what do I guess, more readily give to or what comes to mind for me, I actually do think that in just kind of stopping to survey the different ways that our family is trying to make a meaningful difference in the world, it was pretty split between, organizations like Navigators and Crew and the very good work that they're doing domestically and then overseas missions as well. So
you have a diversified portfolio.
I guess so.
That's great.
I guess so.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I did think that it was really significant kind of to our point about there being other entities in the domestic context that do work with populations in need, whatever that need might be, whether it's the gospel or other
shelter.
kinds of support. Yeah. She made a comment that domestic workers need a really clear vision of what they want to do. And I do think that's important because you, for example, want to work on a college campus, ministering and discipling college students. I think it would be really important to be able to identify how that will look different than the local church that's also prioritizing being on campus and working with students, right? And I don't think there has to be an either or. I think that whoever God wants to call into working with students should take the steps they need to do that, right? Whether it be through the local church or whether it be through an organization that has presence on that campus. But I do think that speaks to why their vision needs to be clear so that people aren't thinking, well, wait, doesn't my church do that? And I'm giving to my church,
Good. Yeah. Yeah. The vision seems to be, I mean, it's important in both scenarios, either international or domestic, but maybe because it's a little more challenging to raise domestic, it becomes even more important to have a clear vision, to have a well thought out vision.
Well, and people might have more of a context for, well, isn't that work already happening?
Right.
And so your vision needs to help them understand how is this unique and different.
Right. There's some amount of education that needs to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
One of the things she talked about too was when you are local and all your supporters are local, it makes it a lot easier because you're in proximity just to hang out with them, just to go grab coffee with them, spend time with them, and then just report to them in a very kind of organic way. That is something that living on the field, living cross-culturally for me, that was very challenging.
Yeah.
On the other hand, she pointed out that because everybody knows that, there can be also an expectation that they're going to do that.
Yeah. And I can imagine that it would feel difficult, to just kind of know in any setting you walk into, you kind of have to be on to answer questions or to speak to your ministry. And I think that would be hard. I think that would be a unique challenge.
That's a great point. Yeah. It sounds exhausting sometimes. Yeah. Well, and that came up later. She said, I really feel like I had to prove myself early on. And that's an interesting thing. I just got to scratching my head. Like, what do we do with that? Because in some sense, it is nice to have that accountability.
Mm-hmm.
I was reflecting, like, if I was not on support, I would not have felt it nearly as compelled to like send a communication or send a newsletter or post about it, or to be as intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Or even to be as intentional with my own time.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, well, people are paying for me to be here. I really need to be thoughtful about this.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like you could take that too far, to the point where you're like, well, I have to keep performing.
Yeah.
Because people have this expectation of me. So I don't know. How do you find that balance?
Yeah. It strikes me that it's probably, just an invitation for a heart posture, right? Because I think if we find ourselves postured towards needing to prove or validate or justify, that feels very different than maybe a heart posture that's more sharing or educating or informing. Yeah. And it just feels like one of those heart postures kind of feels like there's an expectation they need to meet versus like relationship that they're extending and inviting people into. And I think there is a tension with being accountable in a way that you have stepped into kind of a different level of stewardship. On behalf of your partners, you're stewarding your time and the resources in accordance with what God has asked of you. And it does require just, I guess, a bit more communication, but certainly it can start to go sideways when it feels like we're answering to our partners versus God, maybe. Yeah.
And it can be so hard because I can understand the role of like an organizational fundraiser who needs to write reports to donors, to like high-end donors.
Right.
Like they really want to know, what's the ROI here? What's the return? Like, how many conversations are these people having? What kind of an impact are they having? And that can be so hard to evaluate because it's such an internal thing. Like you can say, I spent this much time with these types of people, but like the Holy Spirit's at work there. So it's hard. But I understand like the need to report those things too.
Yeah.
And be accountable. So
yeah, it's another area that has a lot of nuance and complexity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could almost do another episode on it, I think.
We probably should.
Right? Yeah.
Okay, so something really fun from the episode that stood out to me, and it just makes me smile, is that she said that at one point she was discipling 5 different Emilys, and that she would think sometimes about what it would be like for her partners, or, like let's say the Lord has come back, we're in heaven, and she has an opportunity to introduce one of her partners to one of these Emilys. And they're like, oh, you're the Emily that was spelled this way. Because she said that the 5 Emilys had all different spellings of their names.
That's crazy.
Which, was really fun. But I thought that was cool to think about, just thinking about. And that's universal. That's not just for people that work in domestic ministry. That's anybody doing ministry everywhere, that just thinking ahead to this like really beautiful reality of, one day it's all going to be known.
Yeah.
And the people that partnered with me in this way are going to be connected to these people. And that was just a really cool thought.
Right. And they know about those Emilys because they've been communicated with so carefully and thoroughly.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, she's shared stories.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the tips that she talked about was how important it was to have a healthy rhythm of communication. And that early on, she was told, like in her job description, 10% of her total time needs to be given towards communicating and kind of like partner development, which got me thinking like that is a pretty normal thing. I think when you have a domestic job, a secular job, when you're reading the job description, you're like, well, 40% of your time will be given to these tasks, 20% to these tasks, et cetera, et cetera. And then that's a normal thing to have it broken out like that. I don't think that's as common in like the mission world, in like the cross-cultural mission world. It's just kind of assumed like this is how you'll spend your time. But I think that's really healthy actually to thoughtfully carve out that amount of time towards fundraising, because I think that you can just be consumed by whatever's important in the moment, the tyranny of the urgent over there. So whether it's hanging out with local friends or meeting with your team or strategizing or whatever, all that stuff feels so immediately important. It can be easy to let that communication slip.
Yeah. To your point, there's just so many other things in life that can use our time. This is actually a human thing. This isn't just a ministry worker thing, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So it's a human thing to need to put the big rocks in. And it's important to consider partner development as a big rock. And it's not the biggest rock, right? I think 10% of time could be a fair, assuming you're not in maybe a crisis mode or something like that. But yeah, and I appreciated that she said that first she kind of thought of that as like, okay, in every week I need to use 10% of my time, and that her colleague or coach, whoever it was like, no, actually think of it more in the year and kind of like rhythms of partner development. And I thought that was helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think for a lot of us, like, it can be tempting to think of like a summertime or a furlough or a home assignment as like a vacation. But that's in fact probably where you're going to have the most interaction. Again, I'm shifting into international context, but that's where we're going to have the most interaction with your donors.
Yeah.
So you need to have the vacation at a different time. That really is critical to have those times with when you're in proximity with your donors.
Well, and it strikes me, and I'm aware that listeners, you haven't heard this conversation yet, but we have an upcoming episode with Amy Young on the humanity and fundraising. And as you say that, Andy, it strikes me that there's even a little bit of tension with, yes, you should go into any amount of time you have in your home context. You should go into that time assuming that it is going to be filled with opportunity to have face-to-face connection with partners. And within that, it's probably going to look different person to person in terms of, being true to the fact that you are a human with limits. So for some people, all weekend being with people might just like
all weekend, every
fry
weekend.
them out. Yeah. But it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Like there can be really healthy rhythms within even prioritizing partner development while you're home, but not running yourself ragged. So there's balance.
I think the takeaway for me is I really like that fundraising, partner development is part of your job.
Yes.
It's not something that's bonus.
Right.
Like it has to be worked in.
You get to it if you can.
Right.
It's like it's like a big rock.
That's a recipe for attrition. Yeah. So I liked what she said about her 3 tools, which was 2 asks and 1 follow-up. Right. So the first ask is a financial ask. The second one is a recommendation, which I really liked her wording. I thought that was helpful just to have those words. So she said, again, to repeat it for you, who are 3 to 5 people who would be encouraged to hear my story. And I thought that was helpful because she kind of almost like de-emphasized like the fundraising part. And at first, as I listened to that again, I was thinking, how would I feel if I was doing that? Would I feel okay with that? Would I feel like I needed to clarify that, of course, I am going to be looking for a partnership too? Or maybe that's implied. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think there's such an invitation there to really, I don't know, cultivate a posture that's like, sure, you are looking for partners, but there's always more at play too, right? Like it reminds me of another upcoming conversation we had with Callie Davis. She's with Via Generosity, formerly SRS, Support Raising Solutions. And she talked about how one of her partners gave her, I think, 20 or 25 names of referrals, and she contacted all of them, and none of them were a yes. But at the end of the day, she still felt like she should have talked to all of them.
There was a reason for that.
Yeah, believing that God had an invitation for them in even considering. Yeah. In hearing her story and considering. And I think if we're really able to kind of hold that it's not like we need the return on investment for each conversation to be
fruitful.
Right. Fruitful in the way that we would see it in terms of financial partnership.
Kingdom fruitful.
Yeah. I mean, if you can live in the freedom of like, hey, I really do want to invite as many people as I can. And I know they're not all going to say yes, but I believe God has something in the invitation. Like if you can live in that kind of freedom. Yeah. I feel like it takes away some of the awkwardness of asking for referrals, because I really think if you can authentically live in that freedom, other people will feel that, and that it won't feel kind of like you're just trying to get names for money, right?
Right.
So I don't know. I guess as I'm saying that, it can sound a little naive, especially when okay, bottom line, I really need to see the Lord's provision in this way, or I really, like, I'm waiting on and banking on the Lord's provision in this way, you are going to be in your head about where is that provision coming from. So I'm not trying to be naive that it's just kind of inconsequential.
Yeah.
But I feel like there's a way to wrestle through that and continue moving forward.
Put yourself in the right posture.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think of Philippians 4. This is in my mind because we cover this a lot in the Provisio curriculum. There's a section there where, Paul's talking about how he's content in all circumstances. He's content with a lot. He's content with a little bit. And then he goes on to say, I'm seeking this funding, not for my sake, but for your sake. I know what this is going to release in you, and not that it's any sort of prosperity formula. Right. But that money is connected to our sense of control.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
And if we can release our control over things, that does bless us.
Well, and money is connected to our treasure.
Yeah.
Like what we value.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we're able to posture ourselves, I actually am doing something that is good, and I'm actually doing them a favor, I think it takes a little bit of the pressure off.
Totally. And just thinking of the posture, I don't know about you, but I find myself throughout the day realizing ooh, I don't have good posture right now. Have you ever heard people say you need to put your shoulders back and down?
Sure.
Yeah. But I'm readjusting that all day, every day, because I just become aware oh, I'm not quite postured. And I think that's the way it is. I don't think it's necessarily just place you arrive and then operate out of necessarily, as much as it's just kind of an awareness and reposturing throughout the process,
Right. Yeah, because you can kind of be apathetic after a while and just start to slouch.
Yeah. Or even just not aware, just unintentional. Yeah. But I guess to come back to what you were just saying about Paul saying hey, this is for your benefit, not mine. We have named our podcast, It's Not About the Money, because we think there's so much more going on in this reality. But I appreciated the story she shared from scripture that was just pointing to how sometimes it was about the money. It was about the people pulling together their resources to do the thing that needed to be done. I think the story she talked about was from 2nd Chronicles, where they brought of what they had for the temple.
Yeah.
Yeah. During the episode, we just kind of reflected on how it's kind of a human thing to pull together in the wilderness. They pulled together to make the calf that they worshipped. But in other parts, we see that they pull together and that they all give of what they have toward furnishings for the temple and things like that. And so I think that there is a real beauty to the actual giving of the money. And so even though it's not about the money, it's not that the money isn't important.
It makes me think that it's unfortunate that so often our donors are removed from themselves. Meaning you kind of give into this fund, and the missionary, but you don't really know any of the other donors often.
Yeah. You don't see the collective.
You don't see the collective. That would be a really fascinating thing to study as far as sustainability and people just kind of remaining engaged.
Yeah, that would be an interesting study, because I wonder in scenarios where a specific congregation or group is tasked with taking up a donation for something.
Yeah.
I wonder if the collectiveness of that helps.
We're all giving to that.
Yeah.
So listener, if you are in that scenario, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, we would love to hear from you.
And how it has worked.
Yeah.
Because I can see it being a really awesome, a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah, to be able to look across the aisle and know that you are in it together.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be cool. Well, and I'm reminded again of the conversation we had with Michelle Goodman, and she actually spoke to that being on a core team. And she was it's been so cool for me to meet the other members of the core team and to get to know them and to know we're working together towards this common purpose.
Being on mission together builds community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great tenet. Before we get too much further, I want to speak to the fact that in her example, in her asking example, she's asking people for $200 a month. And I'm guessing that some of the listeners heard that for the first time. $200 a month? That's a lot of money. I can't imagine asking an individual for $200 a month. So let me just say, I think it's okay to contextualize your ask for one thing. And that at different stages of your life, that seems more or less reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
If you're fresh out of college, $200 a month sounds like a ridiculous amount of money. It seems astronomical. But I was talking with one of my clients, and he was reflecting because he had gone when he was fresh out of college, and then he's going again now with a family of 4. And he just kind of reflected that his relationship with money had changed.
Mm-hmm.
When he was a new graduate, yes, $25 a month seemed like a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
But now, if he was asked to be part of somebody's network giving team, $100 a month would be nothing to him.
Mm-hmm.
Just because he has more money, he has more of it. And so that's a very natural thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think, like I said, it's good to contextualize your ask for your donors as well as for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're walking into a dorm room with people that are still in school, don't ask them for $100 a month.
Mm.
Maybe ask them corporately as a group to come up with $50 or $100 a month.
Mm.
But to ask them each one individually is probably unrealistic.
Mm.
But also really compelling to call them to something higher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because she reflected on that as well, like moving from $150 or $100 a month to $200 a month.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that can be strategic. I'm pulling from another conversation from another one of my clients again, and he would approach his donors with a larger ask, knowing his own limitations and knowing his own value for communicating so intentionally with each one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And he knew that if he had 50, 60 donors, he wouldn't be able to keep up with them.
Right.
And so he worked it into his ask, and he's just said, I know how important it is for me to really be connected to my donors.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't do that with a lot of people. So would you think about a larger gift? Would you think about a $150 or $200 a month?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it worked well for him.
Cool. Yeah. It feels very intentional. You know, like you said, he was aware of his own
Limitations.
Yeah. And yeah, he was inviting people into a very specific thing. The story that she shared was really interesting about, I think it was Alexander the Great, his daughter getting married or something like that. You know, I mean, the premise of the story was that they had maybe a large wedding budget, but Alexander the Great's response was like, not only do they believe me to be capable, but they believe me to be generous.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was a helpful way to see that it can be an honor to ask people.
And I think Shadrach has a similar story in the God Ask with Napoleon.
Oh, okay.
When this captain just approaches Napoleon and asks him like for the island of whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And Napoleon's comrades are just shocked when he says yes. Because who is this guy? He's just some captain in the army.
Mm-hmm.
And he said like he honored me with the ask.
Mm-hmm.
He knew that I was capable of giving that to him. And so I gave it to him.
Yeah.
There is something that is edifying and honoring with an ask. It's not offending. And that was one of the questions that we asked her was, were people offended by that larger $200 a month ask? And she said no.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I don't know if that's our flesh or that's a lie that is being told to us that we're gonna make people mad by asking for too much money.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe some people are, but
mm-hmm.
I think if you put it in the right housing,
mm-hmm.
that it really helps.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We had a little bit of discussion with her about short-term specific fundraising.
Great.
And so I wanted to just kind of jump over there really quick because I thought what she said was really helpful. So it sounds like she really felt like the value and emphasis was on the accountability and maybe learning and training in a cohort or having community in the process. Is that what you heard?
Yeah. I think that's unique and strategic, and it's not something that we default into. I think that takes a little bit of openness and training and vulnerability, which is not normal, but really, really healthy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
It's hard for us not to compare ourselves and like compete, but can we make that into like a healthy competition and not like a shame-based competition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't even know if it needs to be competition necessarily as much as there's just an invitation for the shared goals and accountability. I mean,
the iron sharpening iron.
Yeah. And just knowing that other people are in it with you and they're experiencing the same things. And
maybe that's my own personality showing my competitive nature coming out. Yeah.
Well, and honestly, for some people, I think that is helpful. I mean, I think that there's a way to stay playful and competitive as opposed to aggressive and competitive.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. when it becomes aggressive competitive, you probably need a heart
It's
check,
not
you know,
fun.
to put your shoulders back and down again,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
to reposture.
Yeah.
Yeah, but certainly I think competition is one way that we operate as humans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But also just to know, like, I'm not in this alone. I
Yeah.
have there's other people that are going through the exact same things. And this person is like my same demographic, and they're accomplishing this. The Lord is using them. I don't have any excuses.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I can do too.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Heather, I think we could probably talk for a long time about all the ins and outs of this episode, but I think it was really helpful. So blessed that she was able to come on,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe just to keep the show at a reasonable length, we could stop now.
I think that works.
Yeah.
All right. And we will be back next week with a conversation with Seth and Megan Halligan,
Oh, it's so good.
speaking to what you do when the unexpected happens and things don't go according to plan.
And Seth is a fellow 7. To hear him process it. That's hard for us.
Yeah. So, all right. We'll catch you guys next week.
It's Not About the Money is presented by Provisio Fundraising Solutions. Provisio equips support-based workers with flexible training, practical resources, and one-on-one coaching. Find out more at provisiofundraising.com.